Welcome to the finals presentation on our 5-part series on the PLAAFP. Today we're going to talk about measurable and observable baseline data for the proposed goals in the IEP. My name is Dina Crook. I am the Parent Education Coordinator for the Lake Travis CPAC. I have taught in public schools as a special education teacher and a dyslexia therapist, and I'm also retired from Texas State University, where I worked with pre-service teachers for over 20 years. I just want to reinforce that as an active participant in the ARD process, that you should request a copy of the draft IEP. It would be helpful for you to receive that draft no later than 5 school days prior to the ARD so that you can process through it, formulate questions, make some suggestions, and also you can voice if you have any agreements or disagreements with the proposed plan. So it really is to your advantage to request that draft, read through it, and come prepared so you can be an active participant in the ARD process. Okay, so first, before we talk about baseline data in the PLAAFP, what is baseline data? Baseline data for this purpose is quantitative data that reflects what a student knows or does not know about the IEP goal that is being proposed. And the quantitative just means numerical data. Why is it important to have baseline data? It's important for 2 reasons. First of all, if we collect the baseline data, then we have a starting point to know what the student knows about the goal that's being proposed. And so if we know where the student is starting at, then we should be able to track measurable progress through each of the grading periods in the IEP progress report and hopefully see mastery of that goal by the end of the IEP year. So it establishes a starting point. We know where the student is functioning for that proposed goal, again, so that measurable progress can be evidenced. It also allows the committee to determine the reasonableness of the goal. Is this goal appropriate for the student? For example, I was in an IEP meeting and the teacher proposed a goal on comprehension and being able to determine the main idea. But she did not have any data to say that the child was struggling in determining main idea. So we could not accept the goal because there was no baseline data to support it. After gathering the baseline data, the teacher came back and said the student understands how to find the main idea in a passage. So that was great news that the student knew that, but because we requested that baseline data, we found out that that goal that was being proposed was not reasonable. Also, sometimes goals in looking at their measurement, you want to say, is it appropriate for that student to go from, for example, knowing 25% all the way to knowing 95% in one academic year? And it depends on the student, it depends on the disability, and it depends on the goal. But usually that's a lot of ground to cover in 1 year, and so that might not be a reasonable goal to make a 95% if you're starting at 25%. So that is why it's important to know where we are starting. Let's talk about what we mean by quantifiable data. It means you can measure it and you can observe it. So a non-example that I've seen in some drafts is something like this. Pat reads many words inaccurately and the reading is very choppy. Okay, so it just sounds like Pat's not a smooth reader and is not very good with the words. But that only gives me an observation of the student's reading. It doesn't give me any very specific things about that student's fluency. So a better example of something that is quantifiable would be Pat reads 3rd grade text with 85% accuracy at 65 words correct per minute. I know that Pat can read 3rd grade text. I know that when Pat reads 3rd grade text, it's at 85% accuracy. So if there's 100 words in that passage, the student's missing 15 of those words, and that the student can read 65 words correct in 1 minute. So that tells me a lot of information that we can use to measure progress throughout the year. So if we want to go from 85%, maybe it'd be reasonable to go to 90%. And at 65%, 65 words correct per minute, I would have to look at some historical data and some other norms to decide where we should be in one IEP year if we're reading 65 words correct per minute. It shouldn't be 70, but it shouldn't be 100. It should be somewhere in between the two. All right, so in order to look at this part of the PLAAFP, you kind of have to do some working backwards. You have to look at the goal section. So the first thing you have to do is flip to the goal section if the goal is not already pre-written in the PLAAFP. Some authors of PLAAFPs will put the proposed goal in the PLAAFP, and some authors will not. But you go to the goal section, you read the goal, and then you flip back into the PLAAFP and you ask yourself, is there baseline data that is aligned to the goal so that we know that we have a place to start so we can see measurable progress and we can determine the reasonableness of the goal? I'm going to give you, here's an example of what I mean by working backwards. So I'm going to go to the goal section of the IEP and I'm going to look at the first goal. And the goal says, by the next annual ARD, given specifically designed instruction in math, a number line, a number chart, and manipulatives, blank will solve 3 out of 4 two-step mixed operation addition and subtraction word problems in 3 out of 4 trials. I color-coded the words in this goal for a reason. I'll talk about it in a minute. So I go flip back to the PLAAFP, and I see that both the classroom teacher and the special education teacher observed that this student was having difficulty in computation with word problems. And so some baseline data was gathered, and we see that on 11/2/23 that the student was able to solve 1 out of 4 two-step addition and subtraction word problems. Notice the 1 out of 4 is green, and that matches the goal that says they have to solve 3 out of 4. And then it's on two-step addition and subtraction word problems. This matches the goal that says that the student will be doing two-step addition and subtraction word problems. So in that way, those two things align. So the baseline data and the goal data are aligned with one another. And then we see that 3 more trials were done, and we see the dates for those trials. Next to each trial, the bullet numbers are blue because in the goal, it says for 3 out of 4 trials. So in collecting the baseline data, we used two-step word problems, and each time we collected data, we gave the child 4 problems to see how many that child could solve correctly, and we did 4 different trials. So the goal and the baseline data align beautifully. In the bottom of this slide, you see apple to apples. So we're comparing apples to apples so that we're able to best determine how much measurable progress is being made. So this child is solving an average of 1 problem correctly out of the 4 trials that was given. So we can hopefully see some growth as we go through the annual year. And we can determine that, yes, this is a reasonable goal. Looking at this for the child at the end of one IEP year, 36 weeks of instruction, that this child should get to the point where they're able to solve 3 out of 4 problems across 3 out of 4 trials. So that concludes this part of the series on the PLAAFP and our entire PLAAFP series. I had fun making these presentations, and I hope that you will find them helpful.